Hey, everybody, welcome to our virtual Bible study. We are so glad you've tuned in tonight to our current study of the book of Proverbs. And we're really doing more of a topical study of the book of Proverbs, not verse by verse. So we've entitled this Wisdom for Life. And if you're keeping up with our current lessons, this is lesson number six. Lesson number six in our study of the book of Proverbs topically under the heading of Wisdom for Life. And tonight, or today, I should say, in this particular lesson, we'll be talking about marriage. And we're going to do probably two parts on marriage. So this will fall under lesson 6 and lesson number 7. And I make the mistake all the time of saying today or tonight when I'm making these recordings. It's going to originally air on a Wednesday evening, but it'll be out there in perpetuity from now on because once it's archived, you'll be able to access this after the first. We drop this on a Wednesday evening at 7 p.m., so that's why I always say tonight. But you can be sitting at home on a Friday morning and you can watch this video, or you could access this hopefully a year from now in the archives and have no concept of what day this aired on. That's the benefit of these videos. Now, along with that, I want to say if you're on YouTube, if you could help us out by subscribing to our channel. If you've not done that, please do that. Take the time to do that. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. Subscriptions are free on YouTube. They don't cost anything, but it benefits you by never missing content. It benefits us by boosting the viewership of the videos. And we want to be more visible. We think out of all the things in the world that should be seen on channels like this, it ought to be truth that connects us to God and shows us more of God. So if you can help us to do that, we'd be so grateful. And we're not monetized. We don't make money off of it, but we would like to present the truth. We want to get the word out there. Also, if you're on Facebook, the best you can do for us is to share the video on your own timeline. That's huge. It goes a long way in getting the videos out there. There's no hope of us reaching as many people as we could without you sharing the video on your timeline. Because we're a public page, you have to come to our page and like us and follow us. And we don't do the friend request and accept the friend request. That's not how our public page works. Again, we're not monetized. We don't make money. So there's no way to see us unless you make us visible on your timeline. So share it, let people see it. And then hopefully they'll come back to our page and follow the page, and then we'll boost viewership that way. But there's just a whole world of billions and billions of people that could easily reach this truth if we all do our part and share, and other people share, and it just gets shared and shared and shared. We're not after glory and fame. We are after the glory of God. We want Him to be exalted, and that's why we believe His truth needs to be the most prominent thing in our world. It would shape our world as it needs to be shaped if we could do that. So help us out. Okay. Lesson number 6. This is like the first of a two-parter on marriage. And we're not going to do part A, part B. We'll just do lesson 6, and then we'll come back in lesson number 7. We'll do another one on marriage. This one is going to be about premarital thoughts. Premarital thoughts. And more about mate selection than anything else. And I started out thinking I won't have a lot of notes on this one, and I ended up with a lot of notes on this one. So I'm going to do my best to get through this, and we try to cap it at 30 minutes. That's a pretty good video size for us to put on YouTube. So let's get started. Here's the first point. I'm going to follow the notes like we do in the class, the live class, which we would invite you to always be a part of. Here's the first point. To be married, a person has to select a mate. Okay, so that's a given. You're going to be married to somebody. There's a process of selecting a mate involved in that. So what wise words does God supply through Solomon about the selection of a spouse? Now, I want to look at one verse to sort of set us up for why it's so important to look for a spouse. Look at Proverbs chapter 12. Look at verse 4. Proverbs 12, look at verse 4. So let's listen carefully. Verse 4 of Proverbs 12. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who causes shame is like rottenness in the bones. So, an excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but there are some that are the rottenness of the bones of the husband. So, what's all that mean? It means that happiness, your personal happiness, depends on the selection of your mate. Now, you don't have to be married. There's no rule in the Bible that you have to be married. It's a good thing to be. God made it to benefit the husband and the wife and the kids, according to Malachi 2. I mean, the whole family's involved in that. But if you do select a mate, pick a good one, because your happiness depends upon the mate that you select. That's what he's saying in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 4. And the excellent ones are like a crown, an ornament, because she adorns her husband, and vice versa. The husband also adorns the wife. They beautify each other. They make each other's life so much more special. But some wives bring grief to their husbands. That's the truth. Just like some husbands bring grief to the wives. But the point is that the happiness of each other depends upon the selection of the mate. So why does it matter? Well, it's because our spouses are the nearest and the greatest influences in our life. That is an undeniable fact. If you're going to be married, your spouse becomes the number one influence in your life. They wield incredible power over you. And that's just a fact. If you look in the Bible, there are some excellent examples of both the positive and negative of that. If you think about Sarah, she was a tremendous influence on Abraham, even though she sits in the back of the story, because the story is that of redemption, and it's the development of the promise through Abraham, and then through Isaac, and through Jacob, and then through Judah, right? So you get the development up through the men, because that's how lineages work. But Sarah was a woman of faith. How about Zacharias? Luke chapter 1. Can't tell his story without also including Elizabeth, because according to that passage, they were both righteous people, and they both walked in fellowship with God. So there are incredible stories in the Bible of men who did great things, but had women who were behind them who helped them do great things. Well, the same is true in a negative sense. There are, verse 4, there were certain women who were rottenness to the bones of the men in the Bible. For example, Delilah to Samson. Now, you're not going to see me defend Samson. Samson was not the best of, Samson was not a great guy. He was weak. He was a weak man morally. Might have been strong physically, but he was a weak moral man. But Delilah took him down. She was his kryptonite. She knew exactly what buttons to push and what gears to turn to bring him down, and she was effective. In 1 Kings chapter 11, Solomon married a number of women beyond what he was supposed to marry, right? And they turned his heart away from the Lord, and he started worshiping false gods. So a woman can either be the crown of the husband, or she can be rottenness to his bones, according to Proverbs 12 in verse 4. So our happiness depends upon our spouse. So it behooves women looking for men to be careful of the men they choose. And it behooves men who are looking for a woman to marry to be careful the woman they select. So let's let that be our next 2 points. Let's talk about what men should look for in women, and then what women should look for in men as potential spouses. So men first. And I know there's no order of importance here. I didn't do that on purpose to say men are more significant. You could vice versa. It doesn't matter. I just wrote it first in my notes. I just had these verses stacked up front. So what advice does God give to men looking for a wife? Well, let's take a look at Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 19. Proverbs 19, verse 14. Houses and riches are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife, prudent means wise, right? So a wise wife is from the Lord, is from God. All right, so if a wise wife is from God, then we would say the number one thing that a husband or a potential husband would want to do when looking for a wife is to ask for God's help in doing that. If she's from the Lord, then ask for his help and seek his help. Now, there's a couple of things involved in that, I would believe. One would be you'd want to pray for God's will to be done. This has nothing to do with Proverbs, but I think the advice is timely. James 4, there's a guy in James 4, hypothetically, verse 13, where he says about a man who would go to another city, a such and such a city, and he would stay a such and such a time, and he would buy and sell and get gain. And then that's when he comes in verse 14 says, you don't know about tomorrow. What's your life? It's even a vapor, a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. And that whole section is a rebuke of the idea of making plans without God. If you're going to make life's plan to be married, get God's help in doing that. Because a prudent wife is from the Lord. So make sure you get God's help in doing it. Now, so you'd want to pray about it, and then you want to be patient with God's will. If you really truly believe in the promises of God, and you're trying to be faithful to Him, and you're just trying to do His will, and you ask for a spouse so that you could complete that happiness according to Genesis 2:18, to be full, like the Bible talks about, and have the blessings of having a good spouse, God in His own time will answer that. So just be patient. Pray about it and be patient about it. Those are the two pieces of advice. But a prudent wife is from the Lord. All right, Proverbs 31. Proverbs chapter 31. How about verse 30? Verse 30. And again, these verses are in no particular order. I just wrote them down as they appeared in my scribble. Verse 30. Charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. You know what a lot of people look for today only is physical beauty in a spouse. They want the most beautiful spouse in the world. Now listen, you should be attracted to the person you're going to marry. But he's warning us here. When he says, verse 30, charm is deceitful and beauty is passing, there are things that are more important than a person's physical good looks or whatever air of charm they have about them. So he's warning us about that those things are deceitful and vain. They're grasping at the wind. Because you can have all of those qualities. You can be the most seemingly charming person in the world. You can have a lot of charm. You can have looks that kill, so to speak, right? You can have amazingly good looks, and you can be absent of the things that actually matter the most in life, which is, according to this passage, fearing God. You want a woman that will fear the Lord. That's the most important thing. You need that because the other stuff is deceitful. I mean, you can have something that looks really pretty and is, rottenness to the bones on the inside. Just an absolute miserable experience. A terrible, I want my money back kind of a ride. And once you're married, you're in marriage. You're stuck. You got to make the most of the marriage, right? You got to make it work. And it could be miserable. And he's saying, choose those that fear the Lord. Now, what you want is a combination, right? You fear the Lord, but then somebody you're attracted to that fears the Lord. But look beyond physical beauty, because most people just look at the physical beauty and they leave off the fearing of the Lord. Exalt the fearing of the Lord, number one. That's most important. And let the other stuff fall behind that. So, look beyond physical beauty. Seek God's help. Here's number 3 in my notes. Look for somebody with good discretion, good judgment. You want somebody that's wise, that just makes good decisions. Look at Proverbs chapter 11. Proverbs chapter 11. And let's take a look together at verse 22. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, right? So is a lovely woman who lacks discretion. And the word discretion here is the word that means judgment, right? In decision making. There are good decision makers and there are bad decision makers. And so he's asking the question, what is the value of a gold ring if you just put the gold ring in the snout of a pig? It's why would you do that? And what is the point of a lovely woman who has no ability to make sound decisions in her life? So when you're looking out for a person to be potentially a spouse, look for somebody that has good discretion, good judgment, good discernment, right? You want them to be able to discern between what is good and right, between false and true, what is moral and immoral. You need somebody that knows the difference between those things, or your marriage is in trouble. I promise it's in trouble. Read the scriptures and look at it practically, how people don't do that, and look at the marriages of those people. You're in trouble if you do this, if you choose unwise people to marry. And then, of course, we would add that last category, wisdom. You want a wise person to be married to. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be all wise at the beginning or ever be all wise, but you need some wisdom, and you expect that to grow throughout your marriage. But you have to start with a little bit of wisdom, or you won't survive the challenges of marriage. Look at chapter 14 of Proverbs. Look at verse 1. The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish pulls it down with her hands. So people, according to this, people are either going to build or destroy whatever they lay their hands on, whatever they're a part of. It's like, if I can try to illustrate this another way. For example, if you own something, a property, let's say you own a house, you own property, you tend to take care of the things that you own because you're really invested in that. But you know very well if you rent property, that a renter of your property won't take care of your house nearly as well as you would. And some of them don't take care of it at all. You've had renters who destroy the homes of the people that it belongs to somebody else, and they destroy the house. Well, if you're not wise, right, going into a marriage, you don't have wisdom, and you pick somebody who's really foolish in their decisions. And maybe you can see it just while you're dating. They foolishly spend money. They have no concept of what it means to live in a budget or save, or they're immoral in their decisions, right? They have no discretion at all. There's no wisdom at all in that person. Then they're going to set fire to your house once they're a part of it through lack of wisdom, and they're going to burn it to the ground. They're like a renter who's going to destroy property rather than an owner who's invested in that piece of property. So choose somebody that's going to help build your house through wisdom. And then avoid a contentious person, because you're in for a miserable ride if you choose somebody that's going to be a nag that fights all the time and complains about everything. And the Bible talks about those kinds of people. Look at Proverbs chapter 21. We'll look at 2 verses in Proverbs 21. How about verse 9? Better to dwell in a corner of a housetop. Now, back then roofs were flat, so you could go up to the top and you could walk around the top. And he's like, it'd be better if you took all your stuff and you just put it in the corner of a housetop, just to do that, to get away, than in a house shared with a contentious woman. He's warning us about an argumentative, brawling type of nagging person. You don't want to be married to somebody like that. In verse 19, he says exactly the same thing, with a different word picture, but same principle. He says, better to dwell in the wilderness. Just go out in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman. So it's an unpleasant, agonizing experience, according to Solomon. So if you are dating someone, you're potentially looking at someone to be your wife in the future, and she complains about everything, and she nags. Maybe she nags you already, but she's nagging and argues over every single thing. Don't you dare marry that person, because you're going to end up in a miserable situation where you're married to somebody who is going to depress your spirit. They are going to be, what we read at the very beginning, rottenness to your bones. And that's not a slight against women. It's a slight against women who aren't wise, who are contentious, who maybe have physical beauty, but they don't have the fear of the Lord. And we didn't seek the Lord's help in doing that. So there's a way of choosing a wife. Now, obviously, the overarching theme in all of this, the overarching theme in it all, is that we want and we should desire godliness as the first priority, the first thing that we look for in a future spouse. If they're not a Christian, I'm not going to marry a person who's not a Christian until they become a Christian. And I want to make sure they're faithful to the Lord, because my goal is to get to heaven. And if I have a spouse who's going to destroy that and take my soul to a place I don't want to go with them, then I'm not going to do that. So be very careful who you pick. And Solomon is warning us about the choice of a future wife. In Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 to 5, God told them, don't marry those outside your faith. And I think the wisdom would prevail that would be wise to do even today under the new covenant. We would still not want to marry outside the faith because, according to 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, evil companionships corrupt good manners. While he's talking about the church versus those outside, in a marriage, there's no greater influence than your spouse. So be really careful the wife you choose. Solomon warns us about the selection of a wife. Now, he also does the same thing for a husband. So when a woman is looking for a husband, Solomon also warns through principle, there are things you want in a husband and there are things you don't want in a husband. For example, Proverbs 12, how about verse 10? Proverbs 12, look at verse 10. This is just interesting. Now, listen carefully. It doesn't mean he has to own animals, right? He doesn't have to be a dog lover. But listen to this. There's something about his character you can tell in the way he treats other things. Verse 10, a righteous man regards the life of his animal, but the tender mercies of the wicked are cruel. The principle here is this, right? It's not, does he have a farm with horses on it? If not, I'm not going to marry that man. That's not what he's saying. You can tell a lot about a person's character by the way they interact with God's creation. And animals just happen to be the specific example here. How does he treat animals? Because it says a lot about a person, right? It says something about his overall character. Does he show mercy? Does he show compassion? And it would be reflected in, for example, the way he does that. So look deep into his character. That's what God is telling you, ladies. Look deep into a man's character and look at him. Is he a compassionate person? Does he show mercy? Do you see goodness inside of that person? And what he's doing is providing an example right here in chapter 12, verse 10. Now, same chapter, another piece of advice. Verse 15, the way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he who heeds counsel is wise. Does the man you're thinking about marrying, does he take advice? If he won't listen to advice, you need to stay away from a person like that. He's unteachable, and it's not to say it's your job to teach him and point a finger. I'm just saying part of being a good person in life is learning and studying and getting advice and learning from mistakes. And if a person that you're potentially going to marry as your husband, he's not prone to take advice, you don't want a person like that, because fools know little. And even more, they don't want advice. They reject wisdom and advice. They won't seek it, and they end up committing tragedy and folly all through their life. And you don't want the stress that's going to bring to a marriage. So is he open to advice? And in the first one, is he tender? Is he compassionate? Does he show mercy? What do you know about his character? These are things to look for in a husband. Proverbs 13, look at verse 20. He who walks with the wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will be destroyed. What are his friends like? We don't talk about that very much, but I think that's a really good point to make about potentially somebody you would think as a spouse one day. What kind of company does he keep? If you don't like his friends, you're not going to like him once you're married to that man, because his friends are going to have a tremendous influence on his character once he's married to you. There's an old proverb that says this: he who lies down with dogs will rise up with fleas. That's just like 1 Corinthians 15:33, evil companionships corrupt good manners, right? So you don't, if this man is running with people and they are troublemakers and they're foul and they're potty mouths, and you're not going to change them, and he's not going to change them, but they are going to keep him the same or change him even if he tries to change. They're going to have a tremendous influence over your marriage. So what kind of company does he keep? Look at chapter 14. Proverbs chapter 14, look at verse 29. He who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. Is he quick-tempered? Right, I understand everybody's got their flaws, right? I get that everybody's working on stuff. But do you see consistent habits in the man you're thinking about marrying? Is he just flies off the handle and has no ability to restrain himself? No self-control at all? Is he quick-tempered? In Proverbs 14, verse 17, in that same chapter, he said this, a quick-tempered man acts foolishly. Okay? So quick-tempered people tend to get in trouble pretty quickly, and they bring that into a marriage when they act impulsively. So most marital arguments happen, and I don't mean like the root causes like money, stress, and all that. I mean, most arguments happen because somebody is quick-tempered. They don't know how to pull back and exercise self-control. And then Proverbs chapter 15, verse 27. He who is greedy for gain troubles his own house, but he who hates bribes will live. Is he a cheat? Is the man you're thinking about marrying, is he deceitful or is he honest? Does he love money and just desire it? Because if you'll remember, the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. And there are Bible stories to go along with this, like Achan, Joshua chapter 7, Ananias and Sapphira, Acts chapter 5. Be very careful if you're thinking about striking a covenant with somebody, getting married to somebody who is absolutely obsessed with money. And especially, not just there's danger in the obsession, right? There's danger in the obsession, but especially if you see them being deceitful with it. They're willing to cheat somebody out of money because that's not going to bode well in your marriage. You see what kind of practical advice Solomon is giving? He's looking at the character of an individual, not what they look like on the outside. Now, since men lead the home, what should the top priority be for a woman who's looking for a husband? Well, let me phrase these in the form of questions. Is he going to take you to heaven? That's what you really need to be concerned with. Is that man going to do everything that is within his power to get you to heaven? According to Matthew 16, 24 to 26, is he willing to forsake the whole world to save your soul? And if he's not, you don't want him. Will he save your house? Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7, Noah did that. Is he willing to do whatever it takes to get you and your children to heaven one day? And if he's not, then you don't want him, not as a husband. Will he give God to the children? Will he spend the time necessary to train the children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, like Ephesians 6:4 says, because that primary responsibility falls to him? And will he put Jesus first even before your own life? And will he love you before he loves himself according to Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 to 33, and 1 Corinthians 11, verses 1 through 3. What you want is a God-fearing man, ladies. You need a God-fearing man. Somebody he wants to go to heaven more than anything, and he wants to marry you so that he can take you to heaven with him. That's who you want. That's the advice that Solomon is giving. So really great advice from Solomon about potential mates. And we'd be a lot better off if we did that, because we'd have to shape up and be a real somebody for our future spouse so that they would want to marry us, and they to us as well, that we would want to marry them. All right, we'll come back, part 2. We'll do that the next time we come together under lesson number 7. But listen, keep on studying. If you have any questions, let me know. If you want to study, I'd be glad to just sit down and have a cup of coffee and talk with you if you have Bible questions. I'm not your enemy. I want to be your friend, but I hope that we both, all of us, can be on the same page with God and be open and honest with his word, and that's all we're asking for. That's all I ever want to do, is be honest with the word of God, because truth saves, John 8:32. I love you. God loves you even more than I do. I'll see you next time. Lesson number 7. Bye, guys.